The helicopter shook like a damn washing machine with a brick inside. Just another fun ride out to the Polar Star, 50 miles of open ocean and nothing but white-capped waves below us. I'd done this run 4 times already in my career, but something about this particular stretch of the Alaskan shelf always felt different. Colder, emptier. 20 minutes, the pilot shouted over the headset, his voice crackling through the static. I nodded, not that he was looking. The heavy clouds hung so low you could practically reach out and touch them. Through breaks in the fog, I caught glimpses of the dark water below. Not the kind of place you'd want to go for a swim, especially not in January. Oil work pays well for a reason. Most of that reason was staring me right in the face out the window. The company had called me 3 days ago, emergency replacement for a guy who'd gotten hurt. They didn't say how, just that they needed someone with my experience right away. Triple pay for the first month. Hard to say no to that kind of money, especially after my truck decided to need a new transmission last month. The helicopter lurched sideways and my knuckles went white around the safety strap. Sorry about that, the pilot called back. Wind's picking up. Through the clouds, I finally spotted it. The Polar Star. From a distance, these rigs all look the same. Giant metal islands sprouting up from nowhere, blazing with lights, crowned with that ever-burning gas flare. But as we got closer, I could see this one was older, the kind they built back in the 80s. Weathered, solid, the type that had seen more storms than most sailors. The pilot brought us down toward the helipad, fighting crosswinds the whole way. Not the smoothest landing I'd ever had, but we touched down in one piece, which is all that matters in this line of work. Welcome to paradise, the pilot said, killing the engine. The rotors slowed above us, and that high whine gradually fell to a deep whump 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 before stopping completely. I grabbed my duffel and waited for the all clear. When it came, I pushed the door open and stepped out onto the helipad. The wind hit me like a truck, that special kind of cold that finds all the gaps in your clothes no matter how many layers you're wearing. A tall man stood waiting at the edge of the pad. Gray hair, weathered face, the kind of posture that said he was in charge and knew it. Captain, most likely. He didn't wave or smile, just watched as I made my way across the pad, hunched against the wind. Spencer Brewer? He asked when I reached him. Yes, sir. Jack Miles. I'm the installation manager. He didn't offer his hand, just gave me a once-over like he was checking for defects. Your file says you've worked the North Slope before. 4 years on the North Star, 2 on the Liberty. He nodded, seeming satisfied but not impressed. Good. Then you know the basics. This rig is different, though. I waited for him to explain, but instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a laminated index card. He handed it to me, and I took it, turning it over in my gloved hands. 5 rules, printed in bold black letters. 1. No one goes outside after midnight. No exceptions. 2. Always travel in pairs when on the lower levels. 3. If you hear your name called, verify who's calling before responding. 4. Report any unusual sounds or sightings immediately. 5. All doors must be secured before midnight. I read it twice, waiting for the punchline. This had to be some kind of initiation joke. New guy hazing. I'd seen it before. Scare the fresh meat, have a laugh about it later. These serious? I asked, looking up at him. Miles didn't smile. Deadly. Those rules have kept people alive on this rig. Break them, and you're not just risking your life. You're risking everyone's. Something in his voice made me think twice about laughing it off. I'd met plenty of hard-ass managers in my time, but there was something different in Miles's eyes. Not just authority, something else. Something that looked a lot like fear. What exactly am I supposed to be worried about out here? I asked, pocketing the card. Follow the rules, do your job, and you won't need to find out. He checked his watch. It's 1400 hours. I'll have someone show you to your quarters. Shift starts at 6 tomorrow morning. Engineering section as requested. Before I could ask anything else, Miles turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with my duffel and a head full of questions. My bunkmate turned out to be a guy named Shane Nelson. Skinny, nervous type with the permanent 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd been on offshore rigs too long. Our quarters were standard. 2 bunks, 2 lockers, barely enough room to turn around without bumping into each other. Top or bottom? He asked when I walked in. Don't care, I said, dropping my bag. Take the bottom then. I'm already set up top. He went back to reading something on his tablet, not exactly rolling out the welcome wagon. I started unpacking, hanging my work clothes in the narrow locker. The room felt smaller than the ones I was used to, and older. The whole rig did. Everything had that worn-in feel of equipment that's been patched and repaired so many times it's barely original anymore. "So what's with the rules?" I asked, breaking the silence. "The card Miles gave me." Shane looked up slowly, set his tablet down. "He gave you the card already?" "Yeah, 5 rules. Seemed pretty intense about them." Shane sat up on his bunk, swinging his legs over the edge. He looked at me hard, like he was deciding something. "You ever worked the Polar Star before?" "No, North Slope, but different rigs." He nodded. "This one's different." "So I've heard. Nobody's saying why." Shane rubbed his face with both hands. "Look, I know how it sounds. I thought it was bullshit too first time I got here. Some kind of joke, right? But it's not." I waited for him to continue. When he didn't, I prompted. "So what's rule number 1 about? No going outside after midnight?" His eyes met mine, and there was that look again, the same one I'd seen in Miles's eyes. "That's the most important one. Nobody goes outside after midnight, period. Because people who do don't come back." He said it flat, no drama, like he was telling me water was wet. I sat down on my bunk. "What, they fall in? Get lost?" "Sometimes we hear them. They call for help, bang on the doors." He lowered his voice. "We don't open them, not after midnight." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "That's cold, man, leaving someone outside. It's not someone by then." He looked away, toward the small porthole window. It was still daylight outside, but fading. "Just trust me on this. When that clock hits midnight, you make damn sure you're inside and every door is locked, no matter what you hear." I didn't believe Shane, not really. But over the next few days, I couldn't help noticing things, like how the entire day shift would start heading in around 11:30, no matter what they were doing. How the night shift workers traveled in pairs, always. How everyone carried a radio, kept it on, checked it constantly. On my 3rd night, I was finishing up some maintenance on one of the pumps when I realized it was getting late. I packed up my tools and headed for the main building. As I walked, I noticed everyone else was doing the same thing, hurrying inside, faces tight, checking watches. "Time check?" I asked a guy passing by. 11:48, he said without breaking stride. "Better hustle." Inside, the atmosphere was tense. People moved quickly, efficiently, checking doors, making sure everything was secure. I watched as 2 guys tested a heavy steel door, pulling on it to make sure it was locked. "All secure on level 3, one of them said into his radio. "Roger that, level 3 secure," came the reply. I made my way to the mess hall, where a few workers were having late coffee. The wall clock read 11:55. "First week, right?" A heavy-set guy with a beard nodded at me from his table. "Spencer, isn't it?" "Yeah," I said, pouring myself some coffee. "Cut it a little close there." I shrugged. "Still got 5 minutes." He exchanged looks with his buddy. "Not something to push, man. Not here." At exactly midnight, I heard the sound of the final checks coming through on the radios. All doors secured, all personnel accounted for. The tension in the room didn't disappear, but it shifted somehow, from urgency to watchfulness. I sipped my coffee, wondering what the hell I'd gotten myself into. Part of me wanted to test it, to slip outside just after midnight, prove to everyone that all this paranoia was ridiculous. But another part, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, kept me in my seat. Because whatever was happening here, these weren't rookies. These were experienced oil workers, the kind of practical, no-bullshit guys who didn't scare easy. And every single one of them was scared of something on this rig. For the rest of the week, I followed the rules. I came inside before midnight. I traveled with a partner in the lower levels. I kept my radio on. Not because I believed the ghost stories, but because I didn't want to cause trouble my first week on the job. I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside our room. Late night, maybe around 2 in the morning. Not unusual on a rig running 24 hours, but something about the rhythm wasn't right. Too quick, then stopping altogether. I rolled over, planning to go back to sleep when I felt a hand clamp down on my arm. Shane was leaning over from the top bunk, his face barely visible in the dim glow of the emergency lights. "Don't move," he whispered. His fingers dug into my forearm. "Look." He pointed toward our small porthole window. I squinted, trying to make out what had him so spooked. At first, I didn't see anything, just the dark outline of the deck equipment against the night sky. Then I spotted him, Ronnie Ortiz, standing perfectly still near the edge of the platform, facing out toward the ocean. He wasn't moving, not shifting his weight, not turning his head against the wind. Nothing. "What's he doing out there?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "It's way past midnight." Shane's grip tightened. "That's not Ronnie." "What do you mean? I can see him plain as—" "Don't look directly at it," Shane hissed. "And keep your voice down. It hears better than you'd think." A cold feeling spread through my chest. I'd been on the rig long enough to know Ronnie. Worked with him 2 days ago checking pressure valves. Good guy, always cracking jokes about his girlfriend back in Anchorage. This figure had his build, his work jacket, his posture, but something wasn't right. "If that's not Ronnie, then who is it?" I asked. "Not who. What?" Shane's voice was barely audible. "We've lost 6 men in the 3 years I've been here. It uses them sometimes." I wanted to laugh it off, tell him he was seeing things. But Shane wasn't the type for practical jokes, and the fear in his voice was too real. The figure on the deck suddenly turned. Not a natural movement. Too smooth, like it pivoted on an axis. It was facing our window now. From this distance, I could make out Ronnie's features, but something was wrong with the eyes. They looked like empty sockets, completely black. "Jesus," I muttered. "Don't look at its face," Shane warned. Too late. I was already staring. The thing that wasn't Ronnie smiled, a wide, stretching smile that kept going, showing too many teeth, all of them sharp like needles. "It knows we're watching," Shane said. "It always knows." I wanted to back away from the window, but I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, like in those nightmares where you try to run but your legs won't work. The sound of running footsteps broke the spell. Someone was moving fast down the corridor, headed for the outer deck. The door at the end banged open. "Ronnie!" a voice called out. "Ronnie, is that you?" I recognized the voice. Caleb Rodriguez. He worked the same shift as Ronnie, shared a room with him too. "No," Shane breathed. "God, no." We both watched as Caleb stepped out onto the deck, moving toward the figure. "Ronnie, what are you doing out here? You know the rules, man." The thing still hadn't moved, just stood there, that terrible smile fixed on its face, looking at Caleb now. "Ronnie," Caleb took another step forward. "You okay?" The change happened fast. 1 second it was standing there in Ronnie's form. The next it was something else. Its arms stretched, growing longer than any humans could be. Its legs bent wrong, joints popping as they reconfigured. The face split open, mouth extending from ear to ear, rows of teeth glinting in the dim light. Caleb screamed and turned to run, but the thing moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. It covered the distance between them in a single bound, clawed hands raking across Caleb's back, tearing through his jacket. "We have to help him," I said, already moving toward the door. Shane yanked me back with surprising strength. "You can't. You go out there, you're dead too." "We can't just watch," I tried to pull away. "It feeds on attention," Shane said, dragging me from the window. "The more we watch, the stronger it gets. The hungrier it gets." Outside, Caleb's screams echoed across the deck. Wet, tearing sounds followed. I couldn't see what was happening now, but I could imagine. The screaming stopped abruptly. "Radio," Shane said, fumbling for the one he kept by his bed. "Captain, this is Nelson. We've got an incident on the east deck. It's got Caleb." The radio crackled. "Stay inside," came the captain's voice. "All personnel remain secured. I repeat, remain secured." "But Caleb—" "That's an order, Nelson." Shane set the radio down. "Nothing we can do now except wait." We sat in silence after that. I don't know how long, maybe an hour. No more sounds came from outside. Eventually, I must have drifted off, exhaustion winning over fear. I woke to alarms blaring and voices shouting. Daylight was streaming through our porthole. Shane was already up, pulling on his boots. "They found him," was all he said. We followed the commotion to the main entrance. A group had gathered around something on the floor just inside the door. Dr. Lucy Rogers was kneeling beside it, her medical kit open, hands moving quickly. It was Caleb. He was alive, but barely. His clothes were shredded, deep gashes covering his chest and arms. His face was pale, eyes unfocused. Blood pooled beneath him on the metal floor. "Get me the stretcher," Dr. Rogers ordered. "And more gauze, now." Captain Hayes stood nearby, his face grim. When he spotted us, he came over. "You saw what happened?" he asked. Shane nodded. "I did too, though I wasn't sure what I'd seen." "He needs to know," Shane said, nodding toward me. "He saw it." Hayes studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Later. First we take care of Rodriguez." They loaded Caleb onto a stretcher. As they lifted him, his eyes suddenly focused, locking onto mine. "It looked like me," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "It had my face." Dr. Rogers pushed us aside. "He's going into shock. I need to get him stabilized." As they carried Caleb away, his words kept repeating in my head. "It had my face. It had my face." "That's not possible," I said to Shane once they were gone. "Last night, what we saw, it looked like Ronnie, not Caleb." "It changes," Shane said. "It becomes whoever it needs to be to lure someone out." He ran a hand through his hair. Caleb must have heard Ronnie's voice, or thought he saw Ronnie go outside. By the time he got there, it had already become him, I finished. It had already taken his face. 2 weeks had gone by since Caleb got torn up. He was still in the infirmary, but Doc Rogers said he'd live. The cuts were healing, but something in his eyes wasn't right. Like whatever happened out there followed him back inside. I'd stuck to the rules like they were written in stone. No going outside after dark. Always paired up below deck. Double-checking who was calling my name before I answered. Reporting anything strange. Tonight, I was pulling night watch in the communications room. Not my usual gig, but we were short-staffed with Caleb down and Tommy still missing. The comms room was just a glorified closet with radio equipment, satellite phone, and a desk bolted to the floor. One small window faced the ocean, nothing but black out there now. Jake had shown me the basics earlier. Monitor channel 16 for emergency broadcasts. Log any transmissions. Don't touch anything else. He'd be back to relieve me at 4. I checked my watch. 2:17 in the morning. The room was quiet except for the occasional static bursts from the radio and the constant hum of the rig's machinery. I leaned back in the chair, fighting to stay awake. That's when I heard it. A woman's voice, faint at first, breaking through the static. "Need help. Please. Anyone." I sat up straight, adjusted the dial to clear the signal. "This is..." "Static. Fishing vessel Northern Light. We've capsized. Please respond." I grabbed the logbook, jotted down the time and what I'd heard. Northern Light. Capsized vessel. "Is anyone there?" The voice was clearer now. Young woman, maybe 30s. Scared, but trying to stay calm. "Our emergency beacon is damaged. We need immediate assistance." I reached for the radio mic. This was exactly what Jake had told me to monitor for. The door burst open behind me. Jake stood there, breathing hard like he'd sprinted from wherever he'd been. "Don't answer that," he said, moving faster than I'd ever seen the big man move. He slapped my hand away from the radio. "What?" "There's a boat in trouble." I pointed at the radio. "Woman says they've capsized." Jake's face was hard. "Where'd you hear it from?" "Channel 16, emergency frequency." He shook his head. "I mean, direction. Where's the signal coming from?" I hadn't thought about that. The comms system had directional indicators that showed approximate bearings of incoming transmissions. I looked at the display. North-northeast, about... I stopped. The reading didn't make sense. "Below us," Jake finished. "The signal's coming from directly below the platform, isn't it?" The woman's voice came through again, clearer now. "Please, we're taking on water. I can see your lights. We're so close to you." Something cold settled in my gut. The voice wasn't coming through the static anymore. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere near the base of the platform. "That's Rule 4, Jake said quietly. "Report unusual sounds. Never respond." "I don't understand." "Listen. Really listen." The woman's voice continued, growing more desperate. "I have children waiting at home. Please. We're freezing. The water's so cold." I felt the pull to help her. Every instinct said to respond, to call for a rescue boat. But Jake's face told me something was wrong. Her voice, Jake said. "Listen to how steady it is. She claims she's been in freezing water for hours, but her voice doesn't shake. No chattering teeth, no gasping. Now that he mentioned it, I could hear it. The voice was too clear, too controlled for someone in a life or death situation. And the accent, Jake continued. It changed 3 times while she was talking. First Midwestern, then Southern, now something else. He was right. The woman now had a slight Australian lilt that hadn't been there before. "What is it?" I asked, my mouth dry. "Same thing that got Caleb. Same thing that's been picking us off one by one." The woman's voice changed again. "I can see you in there. I know you can hear me. Please help me. I'm dying out here." "How's it doing this?" I whispered. "Don't know. Don't want to know." Jake moved to the door, checked that it was locked. "All I know is, 3 years back, Night Watch answered a distress call like this one, radioed the captain, who sent out a rescue team." He swallowed hard. "We lost 4 men that night." The woman's sobs suddenly transformed into something else. A laugh, low and wrong, like multiple voices layered together. "Open the door," the voice said, no longer pretending to be a drowning victim. "I'm so hungry. Let me in." I felt my skin crawl. The voices were coming from right outside our door now, no longer even pretending to come through the radio. "We're going to sit here until dawn," Jake said, sliding down to sit with his back against the door. "Don't respond. Don't acknowledge it. That only makes it stronger." For the next 3 hours, we sat in that room while the thing outside cycled through voices, the woman, a child, an old man, sometimes all at once. It begged, it threatened, it described in detail what it would do to us if it got inside. "I can smell your fear," it said in a voice that sounded like wet gravel. "I can taste it through the metal. Open the door. Just a crack." It knew our names. It knew about my truck back home with the bad transmission. It knew about Jake's daughter in Seattle who he hadn't seen in 8 years. I never saw what made those sounds. Didn't want to. The voices finally faded as the first gray light of dawn appeared on the horizon. Jake and I sat in silence for another 30 minutes before either of us moved. "Now you understand," Jake said finally, "why Rule 4 exists. Why we don't answer calls unless we know exactly who's calling." I nodded. The 4th rule now permanently etched into my mind after this terrifying experience. I sat there in the communications room with Jake for a good while after the sun came up, neither of us saying much. The whole night had drained something out of me. Not just being tired, though I was that too, but something deeper. Like having your understanding of what's possible ripped away and replaced with something a whole lot worse. "You should get some food," Jake finally said, pushing himself up off the floor. His knees popped. "Then sleep. I'll tell the captain what happened." I nodded and followed him out. Wasn't much else to do. The mess hall was half full when I got there. Guys eating breakfast before the morning shift. Normal stuff. Coffee brewing, bacon smell, metal forks scraping metal trays. Made what happened last night seem almost like a bad dream. Almost. I got my tray and sat alone, watching the others talk and laugh, wondering if they'd all had their own nights like mine, their own moments when the rules stopped being just rules and became survival. 3 days later is when David Gross disappeared. I was in the equipment room doing inventory when I heard the commotion. Voices raised, people moving fast in the corridor outside. By the time I got to the common area, most of the day shift was already there. Captain Hayes stood at the front, face grim as stone. "As of 1600 hours today, David Gross is unaccounted for," Hayes said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. He was last seen on the west maintenance deck at approximately 15:30. Drew Ramirez pushed his way to the front. "So when do we start searching?" His voice was tight, controlled anger just beneath the surface. "There will be no search," Hayes said. The room erupted, guys shouting over each other, demanding answers. Drew was the loudest. "That's bullshit. He's been gone less than an hour. We've got time to find him before..." "Before what, Mr. Ramirez?" Hayes cut in. The room went quiet. "Before dark, before midnight. You think that matters? If David Gross is still on this rig, he's not David anymore." I felt cold hearing those words. Not David anymore. Just like what Shane had said about Ronnie that night. What Jake had told me about the voices on the radio. "That's it?" Drew was shaking. "We just write him off? Like he never existed?" Hayes looked at Drew for a long moment. "We stick to protocol. We secure all levels. We account for everyone else. And we stay inside tonight." "This is wrong," Drew said. "David's my friend. I'm not just—" "You want to end up like Rodriguez?" Hayes snapped. "Or worse, because that's what happens when we break protocol." I thought about Caleb in the infirmary, the way his eyes looked now, empty, like whatever attacked him took something more than just blood and flesh. "This meeting is over," Hayes said. "Return to your stations and prepare for lockdown procedures at 2300 hours. Dismissed." Nobody moved at first. Then, one by one, guys started filing out. Drew stood there, hands balled into fists at his sides, watching Hayes walk away. I didn't know David well. He'd only been on the rig a few months, younger than most of us. Eager, always volunteering for extra shifts, the kind who'd go check something out without waiting for backup. I wondered if that's what happened, if he heard something, or saw something, and went to look. Broke one of the rules without realizing what it would cost him. That night, the storm hit. Been brewing for days, according to the weather reports. 40-foot swells, winds over 60 miles an hour, the kind that makes the whole rig groan and shift. Hayes had us positioned throughout the structure. Strategic spots, he called them. 2 men at each location, nobody alone. I got paired with a mechanic named Wilson on the 3rd level east corridor. "Maintain radio contact," Hayes told us. "Report any unusual activity immediately, and whatever happens, stay at your post until dawn." The storm hit around midnight. Rain lashed against the metal walls. Wind howled through every crack and seam. The rig swayed beneath us, just enough to feel it in your gut. 2 hours in, the noises started. At first, I thought it was just the storm, metal expanding and contracting, wind finding new paths through the structure. But then I heard it clear as day, someone calling my name from the other side of the pressure door we were guarding. "Spencer," a voice that sounded exactly like Jake. "Spencer, I need help out here. Something's wrong with the emergency generator." Wilson grabbed my arm when I shifted. "Don't," he said quietly. "Rule 3, verify identity." I keyed my radio. "Jake, what's your position?" The radio crackled. "Level 4 West Corridor with Daniels." "Why?" My stomach dropped. I looked at the door. The voice called again, perfect Jake's voice, but now I could hear something wrong in it, something hungry. "We've got activity on 3 East, Wilson reported into his radio. "Voice mimicry." "Acknowledged," Hayes responded. "Maintain position." For the next 4 hours, we heard voices. Sometimes Jake, sometimes Shane. Once, my brother back home who couldn't possibly be here. All calling my name, all asking me to open the door, just for a second. When dawn finally came and Hayes called the all clear, I realized something. The positions he'd put us in, they were all interior corridors, away from windows and outer doors. Places where the voices couldn't reach as easily. Places where we could hear each other on the radios, maintain contact. Rule 5 suddenly made a whole lot more sense. The weeks after that, winter really set in. Daylight got shorter, nights got longer. Temperatures dropped so low that metal would stick to your skin if you touched it barehanded. The ocean froze in patches around the rig, creating this weird patchwork of ice and black water that shifted and cracked with the tides. I got used to the nighttime sounds. Had to, or I'd have gone crazy. Footsteps outside my room when no one should be there. Voices calling names, sometimes mine, sometimes others. Scratching at doors, tapping on windows. Shane told me more about the things outside, how they could mimic anyone perfectly, but always had some tell. Eyes that reflected light wrong, like a cat's. Voices that carried too far in the wind. Movements that were just slightly off, like watching someone through water. "You'll learn to spot it," he said one night as we sat in our bunks, listening to something scratch at our door. The difference between what's real and what's pretending to be real. He was right, I did learn. We all did, those of us who survived long enough. The money made sense now. Triple pay for the first month, double after that. Hazard pay, they called it on the contract, but they never specified what the hazard was. Now I knew. Now I understood the turnover rate too. Guys who couldn't hack it, who broke the rules, who answered when something called their name. I'd been on the Polar Star for almost 2 months when I realized something else. The rules weren't just about surviving the night. They were about surviving each other, about trust. Because when you're trapped on a metal island in the middle of a frozen hell with things that can wear your friends' faces, trust is all you've got, and even that might not be enough. I stood by the window in the communications room, watching the ocean shift in the darkness. 3 months on this rig. 3 months of following the rules, of watching my back, of learning the difference between a crewmate and something wearing a crewmate's face. Almost midnight, Jake said from behind me. He was checking the radio equipment, making his usual rounds before lockdown. I nodded, feeling the weight of what tomorrow meant. My rotation was ending. In 12 hours, I'd be on a helicopter heading back to shore, back to normal life, whatever that meant now. You're quiet tonight, Jake said, just thinking. About leaving? I turned away from the window. Yeah, doesn't feel real. Jake laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. Never does. First time you leave, you think you're dreaming. You get on that chopper and keep expecting something to reach up and drag you back. That wasn't what I wanted to hear. Great, thanks for that image. Just saying what we both know. Jake flipped a switch, checked a dial. You'll be back though. What makes you so sure? Because once you've seen what's out there, regular rigs feel too safe, too boring. He looked up at me, his eyes reflecting the dim light of the control panel. The pay's not as good either. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't find the words. 3 months ago, I'd have laughed at the idea of coming back to this nightmare willingly. Now, I wasn't so sure. The clock on the wall ticked closer to midnight. In a few minutes, the last checks would come in over the radio, and another night of lockdown would begin. I'd been through this ritual 90-some times now, had gotten used to it, had gotten good at it. You think I'm crazy, Jake said, reading my face. But it's like war. People who haven't been there don't get it, can't get it. And people who have been there can't wait to go back? That doesn't make any sense. Jake shrugged. Didn't say it made sense. Just said that's how it is. The radio crackled. Level 4 secure, all personnel accounted for. Jake picked up the handset. Copy that. Communications room secure. I watched as he logged the check-in, his movements efficient, routine. Everything about this place had become routine to me. The constant vigilance, the buddy system, the verification protocols. All the things that had seemed paranoid and excessive when I first arrived now felt as natural as breathing. You know what's funny? I said. I've spent 3 months scared out of my mind, jumping at shadows, and now I'm worried about going back to normal life. Normal, Jake repeated, like he was testing the word. What's normal after this place? I didn't have an answer for that. The midnight all clear came through right on schedule. The rig was locked down tight, everyone accounted for, every door secured. Another night of waiting for dawn while things that shouldn't exist prowled outside. Get some sleep, Jake said. Big day tomorrow. I nodded but didn't move. What do you tell people? When you go back, I mean. What do you say when they ask what it's like out here? Jake was quiet for a long time. I tell them it's cold. I tell them the pay is good. I tell them whatever they want to hear. He looked at me, and I keep the rest locked up tight. I understood. Who would believe us anyway? Morning came after a night of familiar sounds. Footsteps where no one should be walking, voices calling names through the walls, scratching at doors. The usual. I packed my duffel bag, the same one I'd arrived with, though it felt like that had been in another lifetime. Shane was sitting on his bunk, watching me. So, you're really leaving? That's how rotation works, I said, trying to sound casual. You know what I mean. I did know. Shane was asking if I was really leaving, or if I'd be back like so many others, like Jake. I don't know, I admitted. Ask me again in a month. He nodded like that made perfect sense. The helicopter was scheduled for 10 SAU. By 9:30 I was on the helipad with Captain Hayes and a few others who'd come to see me off. The sky was clear, the water below us a deep, impossible blue. It looked peaceful from up here, looked normal. Been good having you, Spencer, Hayes said, extending his hand. You learned quick, kept your head. I shook his hand. Thanks for keeping me alive, Captain. He almost smiled at that. You kept yourself alive. The rules work if you follow them. In the distance, I heard the approaching helicopter, a black dot growing larger against the sky. My ride back to the world, back to a place where doors didn't need to be locked at midnight, where you could walk alone anywhere you wanted, where your name was just your name and not bait in a trap. There she is. Hayes said, looking toward the helicopter. I felt a strange twist in my gut, relief mixed with something else. Regret? Fear? I couldn't name it. As the helicopter drew closer, I looked back at the polar star, the massive structure of steel and light that had been my prison and my protection these past 3 months. From here, it looked like any other rig, impressive but ordinary. Nothing to suggest what lurked in the waters around it. Nothing to hint at the rules that kept everyone alive. I thought about everything I'd seen. Caleb's torn body, the thing wearing Ronnie's face with its needle teeth, the voices in the storm, the radio call from below. I thought about David Gross, who was never found, and Tommy Walsh before him. I thought about all the close calls, all the nights listening to things that shouldn't exist, trying to get inside. The helicopter touched down, blades still spinning, the pilot giving me a wave through the windshield. Time to go. Remember what you learned here, Hayes shouted over the noise of the rotors. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a warning. I nodded and picked up my bag. The others stepped back as I jogged to the helicopter and climbed aboard. Through the window, I could see them still standing there. Hayes, Jake, Shane. Survivors, all of them. People who understood the rules. As we lifted off, I kept my eyes on the rig, watching it grow smaller beneath us. The work would continue. The day shift would move across the platform, always in pairs on the lower levels. The night shift would prepare for lockdown as the sun set. The rules would be followed. Life would go on in that strange, dangerous world I'd somehow become part of. I settled back in my seat as the distance between me and the polar star grew. I had survived to tell this tale, though I knew I never would. Who would believe me? The memories would follow me, the sounds in the night, the faces that weren't quite right, the knowledge that there are ancient, hungry things waiting in the darkness. Maybe Jake was right. Maybe the unique combination of danger, high pay, and the bizarre reality of life on the polar star had changed me forever. Maybe normal would never feel normal again.